Chapter 8. A Religion of Galilean Criminals. Until around the year 150, the records of Tacitus and Suetonius mentioning Christus were the only examples of any ancient writings having a similarity to the name of Christ. Because the name Christus and Christ were pronounced alike, these writings have been critically analyzed by researchers for many years. The Encyclopedia of Early Christianity said it was perhaps a reference to Christ, and the 1908 Catholic Encyclopedia also said he may have been Christ. This could not have been Jesus Christ of the Gospels because according to the New Testament, he never went to Rome. Why the word Christian did not appear in church testimony until well into the 2nd century has been explained in the very orthodox Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church. With over 480 contributors, consisting of leading Anglican, Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, Jewish, Orthodox, and other clerical experts, they claimed on the cover that they were the acclaimed authority on the church. They made this frank statement. Owing to its pagan origin, the word Christian was long avoided by Christian writers. The pagan origin of the word Christian? Surely a stunning admission from such a learned and competent authority. With the new understanding of just who the Galileans were, it is now possible to determine what the church meant. The word Christian was documented by the church in the Acts of the Apostles and appeared to have been introduced to the world for the first time circa 190 by Irenaeus. That particular narrative said the name Christian originated in the city of Antioch, Acts 11:26. And in the context it was presented, suggested outsiders applied the name disrespectfully to a particular body of people. Religiously, Antioch was a mix of ancient Chaldean, Greek, Roman, and Semitic creeds, but there was a person, maybe a woman, there called Evodius, Philistine 4:3, connected to the Christian movement and in some way associated with both Simon of Petra and Paul. The death of Evodius was recorded as occurring in 64. Curiously enough, Sabellius, a 3rd century Roman orator, said the word Christian was spoken for the first time in Britain. Whenever it was first spoken, the word had an entirely different origin than subsequently presented by the church. Tacitus recorded in Annals that Christus was in Rome leading Jews in a revolt, and his captured followers were, after having been daubed over with combustible materials, were set up as lights in the nighttime and thus brightly burnt to death. The history of Rome also recorded that Emperor Nero soaked Galilean criminals with tar before having them crucified and used them as human torches around his garden at night. These were the later followers of Judas Christus, and they were called Christians. That word translated to the English language to Christians, and the narrative in the Acts of the Apostles, Acts 11:26, was originally written Christians, not Christians, and used as a term of abuse. The nature of the Christians. To understand the New Testament and some of the beliefs it expounds, it is important to acknowledge the people of those early centuries were semi-savages, and their religious systems followed the myths of numerous earlier gods and goddesses. It was Pelops, Zeus's grandson, for example, who in childhood was killed and cooked by his father, Tantalus, the son of Zeus, who then served his son's flesh to the gods as the ultimate sacrifice. Thus, the eating of human flesh, particularly children, and the drinking of human blood occupied a foremost place in the rituals of many religions. This ritual was supported by the Christians, the now called early Christians, and St. Justin Martyr, circa 160, recorded that they were intolerable atheists, he said of their unusual nature. They met in secret to eat human flesh, and once the lamps had been upset, to participate in promiscuous, incestuous intercourse. The Romans pronounced the Christians public enemies and looked upon them as a downright monstrous phenomenon, a third race, a destitute and forsaken people. Emperor Marcus Aurelius said that Christians were a strange and distinct class of people given to a new and wicked superstition. While Emperor Theodosius I, almost 200 years later, recorded, "The mob that gave Christians their name hated them for their crimes. Their leader had been put to death under Pontius Pilate, but the deadly superstition spread throughout Judea and even Rome. Some confessed their faith and were arrested. On their testimony, a multitude were convicted of arson, but also of hatred of the human race." The 2nd century Christian apologist Minucius Felix, in a writing attributed to him called Octavius 9, confirmed the bizarre behavior of the Christians. "The names of brother and sister hallow fornication as incest. Their foolish superstition makes a boast of crime. A condemned criminal is the object of their veneration. Finally, there is infant murder, cannibalism, and the banquet with incestuous intercourse." The cannibalism associated with this ritual intercourse was reported under the name of agape and translated to love fest in the New Testament, Jude 12. This drunken cannibalistic orgy was for centuries the early Christian form of the Eucharist, the drinking of human blood and the eating of human corpse flesh. The 4th to 7th century Christian saints and bishops had great personal problems with the love fest. Jerome, in 37 to 420, expressed disgust at the Christians for their participation. The Bishop of Hippo, St. Augustine, in 395, admitted embarrassment that his own mother, Monica, engaged in these macabre festive banquets. She attended meetings in cemeteries under the cover of darkness where human flesh was eaten from the coffins of dead associates. The Bishop of Milan, Ambrose, 333 to 397, unsuccessfully forbade such practices. They were still being condemned as late as the Trullian Council in 692, some 650 years after the death of Judas Christus. It was a widespread and ongoing animalistic custom, and many of the rabble adopted and accepted the Christian name solely to partake in the love fests. To cover up the true origin of the name Christian, the later church reasoned that Christus was a pagan, substitute for Christus, and are careful to use the name Christus in a favorable sense. In referring to the records of Tacitus and Suetonius, the church argued that those historians substituted Christus for Christus, or anointed, and Christians instead of Christians. Thus, the church said, made the early Christian movement appear a religion of criminals. Many of the now called persecutions of the early Christians were due solely to the fact that they were criminal activists, not religious devotees. As Marcellinus Ammonius, the famous Roman historian, said of them in his time, "The atrocity of the Christians against opponents surpasses the fury of wild beasts against men." The Romans were tolerant of any and all religions, excluding Judaism, but very resentful of anything that savored of political rivalry. And much later, when the Christians were finally brought to bear, the field for religious propaganda was wide open. The Messiah of Christianity. Judas Christus was the Christian Messiah in the true sense of the word, the anointed leader of his Galilean apostles. The learned Christian historian Lardner proved that the name Galileans was the primitive appellation of the Christians. St. Epiphanius further recorded that all Christians were Nazarenes. That word was originally written Christians, meaning the followers of Judas Christus, the Galilean, an active revolutionist. Those Galileans were the leaders of a new and pernicious sect which was capable of the most horrid crimes. The original Christians were the militia of Judas Christ, the Galilean, the twin brother of Rabbi Jesus. Here we see the pagan origin of the word Christian confessed to earlier by the church.